Good afternoon and welcome, or good morning if you're in Perth. Thanks for joining us today. We appreciate you making some time to spend with us as we explore preference management. So we've got lots to get through today, so let's dive in and get started. As is usually the case, please feel free to ask questions throughout. We'd love to get your comments and questions. You can use the emoticons, give us a thumbs up or a thumbs down even if you feel you need to. All the sessions are recorded, as you're probably aware, and we'd love to hear from you. So again, please feel free to use the Q&A or the chat throughout the session today. So what are we covering? So welcome, obviously. The first thing we want to touch on is just a quick revisit on some of the impacts of privacy reforms. Now, these are happening in many jurisdictions around the world. Australia is no different. US has multiple arrangements in different states even. And of course, there's the granddaddy of them all, the GDPR out of the EU. So we'll have a quick look at those. Then what we're going to do is look at some of the functional tools that Eloqua gives you to manage preferences and what that might look like and how you can best take advantage of some of those. And then looking at building a user-friendly experience. So how do you engage? What do you ask? And what are some of the things you can do to really give a really positive experience from a welcome or onboarding point of view? We do have some updates for release 25D, which is literally unrolling right now. For those on Pod 7, most of Australia and Asia and New Zealand, you should be live right now. Same with Pod 1, and the others wrap up by the middle of the month as well. So everybody will be on board shortly. My name is Derek Bell. I'm your host for today. And I'm joined by Adrian Jones, our CEO and founder, who is helping me manage the Q&A and chat. So go ahead and keep him busy. So ask those questions. All right, let's dive straight in. First one, this one won't take too long. It's really just a bit of a recap, but it's kind of a critical part of the exercise if we're talking about onboarding and welcome campaigns. So let's have a closer look. Look, essentially, at the end of the day, the opt-in is the fundamental piece, and it really doesn't matter which geography you're in. There is a requirement to capture that opt-in. Now, there's a few critical things to understand that as soon as a contact comes into Eloqua, whether it's through a form, maybe you're advertising on social channels, people fill in a form and they come into Eloqua through LinkedIn, for example. You may have the CRM integrated, most of you do. And so when those contacts integrate into Eloqua, the assumption that Eloqua makes is at that point, the person is globally subscribed. So what that means is that you have the business processes in place to validate and ensure that as a contact comes into Eloqua, that person is in fact subscribed and has opted in to hear from you from the point of view of marketing communications. If your environment is more complex than that and that raises some alarm bells for you, let's have a chat because we need to make sure everybody's on the same page. Now, for GDPR folks, there's all sorts of requirements. A double opt-in is a big one. And so the double opt-in is something that can be easily managed through Eloqua. And we, in fact, assist a number of clients within the EU with that requirement, and even some clients outside of the EU as well, who are playing in that space and require that same level of functionality. In Australia, the Privacy Act is sort of chugging along. It's kind of been quiet for some time. There was a recent update, which I've bookmarked and pegged to update our subscribers to our Privacy Act updates that we do on a somewhat regular basis. So we'll have more information on that. The CCPA and the VCDPA, got to love those acronyms. CCPA is California, the VCDPA is Virginia. Okay, so all of these things can be managed. They'll have slightly different requirements, but essentially the fundamental underlying piece is that you need to have an opt-in. You need to have some way to prove that an individual actually opted in to hear from you. Now, what does that look like? This is an indication of what we would suggest to you it looks like, but we would always encourage you to seek legal advice to validate that within your own organization. So the critical things you need is the date of the original opt-in. Now, Eloqua captures that for you. It's a little bit different to date created. In some cases, date created may also be the date they opted in, but it's not always the same. The other key thing to understand is, what does opt-in mean in their jurisdiction, not your jurisdiction, but in their jurisdiction. So if you're dealing with a global audience, you need to be aware and understand what that means. Look, what a lot of clients are doing typically is looking to the GDPR. I refer to that as the granddaddy of the privacy acts around the world. And it really is. And most organizations, well, not most, but many organizations are finding that if they can peg their standards to the GDPR, that pretty much covers them in every other jurisdiction. And going a step above is not a bad thing for many organizations. The source of the opt-in is the other piece that's really important to have on file or stored within your platform. And so did they come in through a form? Again, was it a social ad you did, for example, or did they come into the CRM or a membership platform? If you're a membership-based organization, how did they come in? So what was the source of that opt-in when it was provided? Of course, the email address is the critical one. You've got to have the email address, and you can't create a contact in Eloqua without having an email address. So that one's kind of easy. But just also keep in mind that the opt-in typically belongs to the email address and not to the human. You may remember within the Australian market several years ago, Woolworths were fined several $1 million. I think at the point it was the largest fine that had ever been issued because they had a complaint from Mr. and Mrs. Jones who were sharing an email address. Mr. Jones had unsubscribed, Mrs. Jones hadn't, etc. And so a complaint was made. They thought they were doing it fine because they had split profiles and one was unsubscribed, so Mr. Jones wasn't getting the comms, but Mrs. Jones was, but it's irrelevant. It's the one email address. That's at least in the context of the Australian Privacy Act. So just FYI on that one. Other profile data that you may want to capture, which can be helpful, would be the name of the person. That would be good. The country is probably a good idea. And in some cases, the state. So like we said, in the United States, we've got the US, so we've got California and Virginia with different requirements. And so you may need to go to a state level in some jurisdictions as well. Now, why? Why do we need to capture all of this? Look, at the end of the day, you need to protect yourself and defend against anyone that may challenge the fact that you said they opted in. So all of that information that I just shared with you on that previous slide would go a long way to defending the fact that a person did opt in. Okay, so you do have permission to talk to that person. Now, the best place to store that information from an Eloqua point of view is probably on a custom data object, or a CDO, as we call it, not on the contact, because the contact is easily overwritten. That's how it's designed. However, a custom object enables you to create an entry for every single submission that the person may do. So not only would you potentially have their original opt-in, you would actually have other opt-ins that may occur at different points within their life cycle or relationship with you as an organization. So I leave those things with you to think about and to make sure that compliance is obviously at the front of your mind as you're looking at those things. All right. So let's get Eloqua to help you do more. And let's have a look at some of the functions that Eloqua can provide to help you go through that process. The first thing to consider and to think about is, from a preference center point of view, how is the person actually getting there? Okay, so it's a click generally, but where are they clicking from? So if we think about the source or the channel, the email is probably the big one to start with, because when people scroll to the bottom of the email, maybe what they're looking for is an opt-out or an unsubscribe link, or maybe it's manage your preferences or manage your subscriptions, whatever it may be, whatever sort of language it is. The person that is typically doing that is probably wanting to unsubscribe. And we'll talk a bit more about that in just a moment. Other sources and channels would be the website, but the website is probably a slightly different shift, right? A different paradigm we need to think about here. If somebody's navigating over your website and there's a call to action to subscribe now or share your preferences or learn more, whatever it may be, if they go from your website to the preference center, that's typically a person who is actually looking to engage. They want information. They want to give you a little bit of information, so you in turn can give them a little bit of information, or probably a lot of information. Socials, again, could be another channel. You may have calls to action on LinkedIn pages, Facebook, etc., those other types of channels where you may direct people from those social environments to a preference center to share information, fill in a form, and now actually subscribe to the various subscriptions that you may offer. Okay, so that's the first thing to understand. And the first thing we need to understand is that those are possibly slightly different experiences that you want to deliver. So the notion of sort of one preference center to rule them all may not be the right approach, but let's have a look. So this is the Marketing Cube footer, just as an example, and you can see the language that we use. Unsubscribe, under the Australian legislation, we need to make it brain dead easy. It doesn't quite say that in the legislation, I think, but it's not too far from. And so the word unsubscribe is there, or manage your subscriptions. Now, you may or may not have noticed, but the link, doesn't matter which word you click on there, unsubscribe or manage your subscriptions, it in fact takes you to the same place. That's the experience that we've chosen to deliver. You may choose to do something different. The click here to update your details, that's really for you as Eloqua users to show you kind of what's possible. And if you click on that particular link in any of our emails, you'll be taken to a page with what you would argue is a ridiculously large form. But the idea of it is to show you the information that we have on file that you've provided to us. So your name, your job title, your company name, maybe it's geography details as well. Maybe you provided a mobile number for SMS reminders, those sorts of things. So all of that information is stored there. And that's all pretty much contact information from that point of view. So two slightly different functions. So that's from the email footer. Now, from the website, it's a slightly different experience. So if people wander across our website, and we also have other calls to action to subscribe today in other locations around the website. And this is something that I would encourage you to think about. Is it easy for people when they reach your website to in fact provide their email and details and subscribe to information about your organization? Something to think about. Is it hard? Do they have to navigate through 1,000 pages to find it? Or is it even right there on the homepage? I'd suggest to you right there on the homepage is probably a good place, and in other strategic locations around the website as well, all leading to a preference center where people can sign up and start to learn more. So to that point, then what we need to focus on, and this is our focus today, is subscription and preference management. Now, they're two slightly different things, but we can weave them into the same experience or the user experience to suit your objective. Now, you might have multiple objectives. You may be thinking about welcome campaigns. You may be thinking about onboarding campaigns. Now, is there a difference? Yeah, I'd argue there is. Reactivation campaign, where did that one come from? Is that a bit of left field? Well, a reactivation campaign is a good friend of a preference center. Let me explain a bit further on that one as we move on. And maybe it's just a really straightforward sign-up campaign. It might be really simple. It could just be a simple, give us your email address, maybe first name, last name. Maybe it's just email address. We typically want to get a little bit more than just the email address, but it could be something as simple as that. Now, with the welcome campaign, typically, and this could just come down to language and vernacular and how the language we use, but I would suggest to you a welcome campaign is not for paying customers. This is for anybody who's coming into your database, and it's an opportunity to explain to that person what it is that you do, and hopefully on the way through, capture some information about them as well, so that you can then tailor that welcome journey a little bit. Versus the onboarding campaign. So the onboarding campaign is typically tailored very much to a new paying customer. So this is somebody who has signed a contract, has parted with some cash, they've paid some invoices, whatever they may be. And now what you're trying to do is actually introduce the firm or the organization, the university, whatever it may be, to that particular person. Slightly different angle. The reactivation campaign, the reason I've thrown that one in here is because a preference center is a great tool to help you with a reactivation campaign. So if you're looking at a group of people within your database who are just not engaging with content, and if you even break it down, maybe you've not even sent them anything in 12 months or so. So they're kind of just taking up space in the database. So before you cut them loose, what you may want to do is think about trying to reactivate them. So the preference center can be a tool for you to use in amongst that particular reactivation campaign, something for you to think about. That's another one of the messages we really wanted to try and get across today is don't Don't think about your preference center as just this one location that people reach if they click on unsubscribe in the email footer. It really is a waste of an asset if that's the only experience that we're really trying to deliver. We want to think about using this tool for a whole range of different things. And of course, the sign up campaign. Now, depending on your objective, of course, and what you're trying to do, the sign up campaign may imply quick, easy, just give us an email address and we'll keep going. Maybe that's the case. So what we do at Marketing Cube is we generally encourage people to go to the Preference Center if they're looking to subscribe and learn more about us and that sort of stuff. However, spread across our website, we do have specific calls to action to subscribe to specific subscriptions. For example, subscribe to our events, subscribe to our blog, subscribe to Eloqua report and updates. And in that case, we actually take people to very specific subscription center, which is just for that one subscription. The logic behind it is they're there, they're on the page, they're looking at our events, they're seeing the different type of events we do. So it's that's what's in their head, etc. So we just want to give them a really targeted experience in relation to events. Now, of course, in the autoresponder email that goes out, the first thing we do is invite them to share a little bit more about themselves. And that's where we would then send them on to the actual preference center, which asks quite a bit more information. What are your interests? What are your preferences? How would you like to hear from us? Tell us about your role, your job, what you do, your industry, a bit more information versus just, hey, welcome to our events. We'd love to have you come along. Understand the objective first as to what you're trying to achieve. Our primary objective today is to look at your primary preference center and what that might look like. Building it to your objective. So by that, I mean, what are the various aspects and pieces within Eloqua that can help us do it? And look, as I started to map out these dots, it's really everything. Okay, the whole platform is geared towards really helping you do this. And this is something that Eloqua does beautifully. It really does manage preferences and enable you to use email groups with their individual subscription, unsubscribe and subscribe function versus the complete opt-out scenario. So there's kind of two levels there you've got to play with, which can be really helpful. So all of these things we can use to deliver a far more personalized experience. So let's dive into those a little bit further, specifically looking at a preference center. Okay. My first message to you would be Eloqua landing pages is where you want to go, not your CMS. Over the years, I've seen, IT strangleholding marketing and saying, no, it has to be on the CMS, etc. And then as soon as you go to the CMS, you lose all of the functionality that we're really trying to deliver, where we're trying to deliver a great CX. Okay, so yes, you can use the CMS, of course, but it will be a subpar experience compared to the level of personalization that you can offer using your Eloqua landing pages. Just as simple as being actually able to greet somebody by name, that can be a struggle for many CMSs. Next one is the form. Now, again, the form should really be an Eloqua form, not the form from your website or the CMS. So the Eloqua form, a native Eloqua form on an Eloqua landing page, enables you to use the pre-population feature, which can be a tremendous tool. It obviously also enables you to use progressive profiling. So we're not asking the same question again. If the person's already told us something, we don't need to ask them again for that. It's generally just a much smarter way to gather that much needed first-party data that everybody's looking for. Now, email groups can play a really important role here too. Now, I'm not suggesting that you need to end up with thousands of email groups. That's the last thing you want to do. But you want to think about the types of subscriptions you're offering, the level of granularity that you want people to be able to subscribe and unsubscribe from versus actually opting out or globally unsubscribing. So that's where the email groups become really, really helpful. And I'll explain further in today's session about how those email group subscriptions can help you from a segmentation point of view. Much easier and so much nicer to work with. Now, the information that you capture within the preference center needs to go somewhere. In relation to the subscriptions, email groups will manage that. That's fine. But there are other pieces of information we want to gather about people. And this is the preferences and their interests, those sorts of things. So where should we put that data? Now, look, it can go onto the Eloqua contact. Now, I know some of you already have your Eloqua contacts maxed out and there are no remaining fields left and you'd need to recycle. It's probably easier to look at using a custom object to do that for you. The custom object is, in many cases, in the context of what we're talking about here today, is probably the better option out of the two. So, of course, your standard first name, last name, company, email, mobile, probably state, and that's fine. That's all contact field. What I'm talking about is, do you prefer golf, football, the ballet, or the opera, which is, that sort of stuff? That's what we're going to put over on the custom object. And of course, the next thing you want to think about is if this person is in fact a net new individual, or perhaps even been with you for some time, what happens when they submit that preference center form? What happens next? Do they just drop into a standard nurture campaign of some sort? Do you maybe take them on a bit of a welcome campaign? I think that's the good direction to go, by the way, would be to take them through some sort of welcome, introduce them to the business, etc. Again, you're going to know, hopefully, within the database, if the person is in fact already a customer, and therefore that's fine. You can take them in a slightly different direction. But if you know they're not a customer, then maybe there's a different type of welcome campaign. So you can immediately see there are different streams that you could start to think about in that multi-step campaign. Okay, so that brings us to the point of having to know our audience. And this is where we kind of want to have fun with the friendly experience, right? And deliver a bit of excitement and stuff to them. So why create a preference center? Well, the key thing that I thought about as I tried to position this in my head was really it can serve as an interface between you and your audience. Between you and your audience, and gives the people that you're talking to the ability to tell you more about themselves. So they can start to share with you the things that are important to them, the things, people's ideas and etc. change over time. If you think about universities, for example, they may start talking to a prospective student in year 10. Now, we all know that in year 10, what we wanted to do in life was completely different to later in the year of year 10 compared to year 11, year 12, gap year, first year of university, right? So there's things that are obviously constantly changing. And even in a professional environment, people's roles change. Therefore, what they need and expect from you can change as well. So giving people the ability to update you and to tailor their experience is a really important thing to do, and very relevant to what we're trying to do from a personalization point of view in all of the different campaigns that we're running. Now, if you've been using Eloqua for quite some time, and I'm just looking at a list here today, there's certainly a few veterans from an Eloqua point of view, you would be very familiar with this. This is the standard Eloqua out of the box. When you buy Eloqua and it gets configured, this is typically the bare minimum, but you reach that page from the footer of an email, typically after you've clicked on unsubscribe. So the whole point of this page, now keeping in mind that each of those different subscriptions you can see there are actually Eloqua email groups. That's what they are, right? So if I arrive there, some will be pre-ticked, some will not. If I untick them, I unsubscribe, or that nasty one at the bottom, of course, I can tick that and globally unsubscribe or opt out completely. But this is really just a subscription status page, right? It's not a preference center. It's just simply a subscription status page. And that's why we talk today about preferences and subscriptions, and they're slightly different in relation to what they're doing. Okay, so most people will replace this. Very few. Well, there are certainly some. I mean, I've seen these pages myself on other random things that I've chosen to unsubscribe from, and I'm like, oh, they're an Eloqua custom. So it kind of is a bit iconic. So we can do better than that. It's a good starting point. In fact, compared to many organizations and platforms, it's a brilliant starting point, but we can do so much better. And that's what we're trying to talk about today. We want people to be able to sign up and have a really positive experience. What do you need to know about people? What's the bare minimum from a technical point of view? But what do we need from them? So this information, typically, we break down into two areas. One is demographics, and the other is firmographics. And so we put other language on top of that. It's contact information on the left and account information on the right. And so typical examples under demographics are those, all very human oriented, obviously, and then the firmographic over on the right-hand side. And there could be a whole range of different pieces of information. Now, that data typically doesn't come from the individual. You would typically get that from the CRM platform or other systems you may have integrated. Okay. Company name, yes, we typically grab on the left from the person. You may get industry, which can be a bit of fun because your account may say they're one industry, but the person sharing says they're in a different industry, but they're in fact in the same company. That's interesting, but not much you can do about that. But yeah, so those two different things. Now there's a third point that we need to think about, which is psychographics, and that's a little bit about what we're trying to do today to make it a bit more fun and a bit more engaging. We've looked at what you want, and that's all that demographic and firmographic data, but what do they want? What are they asking of you? And the best thing to do, of course, is to give them an opportunity to tell you. The psychographics and psychographic data is typically the domain of your research colleagues within marketing. So marketing research firms are very heavy on psychographics. Now, characteristics like values, social status, desires, goals. Now, some of you, certainly me, some of those types of questions I would run a million miles from before even asking any of them. But let me expand a little bit further to give you an idea, because I think there's something we can learn from these organizations, or this principle that will probably help us ask much better questions and better profile questions to help us build out these psychographics, essentially. So aside from the subscriptions that we might offer in relation to specific newsletters, or maybe it's events, or people really want to come to your webinars, those sorts of things, we want to understand what interests them, what motivates them, and what's important to them. So these are I've literally just thrown these on the page as a whole range of different things. The bullet points largely on the right-hand side, I was thinking about Marketing Cube and types of questions that we might ask around interests that people have in the context of Eloqua, digital marketing, marketing automation, etc. So that's what kind of those ones are. But this will be different for everybody on the call. This is the type of discussion that you sit down, probably bring in the sales team, get the marketing team together, and probably just go through a big brainstorming session to figure out what you've got to do. But the other thing I would encourage you to think about is don't get too excited, because you've got to make sure you've got content in place to support it. So if you've got lots of people telling you they love rock climbing, but you have no idea where the nearest rock climbing gym is, and you have no idea what on belay means, well, then maybe we should take rock climbing off the list. Okay. Just keep the content strategy in mind as you get super excited and sharing a whole range of different things. Now, I found some information from an interesting organization, hotjar.com, and I've got the URL there, which I will include in the blog post for you to have a look at. It's very market research oriented in what it's doing, but the thing that I was able to pick out of it was the way we ask questions. We can be smarter about the way we do it. Okay. First of all, 5 psychographic characteristics that they group. They group them as personalities, lifestyles, interests, opinions, attitudes, and beliefs, and values. And then under each of those, you'll find different sort of questions, ideas, and examples that support each of those. So in our world, what could we do that's a little bit different? So my thought maybe, which is your preferred method to consume work-related content? Are you a webinar person? Are you an in-person events type person? Or does a workshop more suit your needs? Capturing this information could help you tailor communication going out, or even to highlight and target particular people based on different events that you might have coming up. Then a little bit more lifestyle oriented potentially. So on a Friday night, where might we find you? Maybe a high school football match, maybe the ballet, or out for dinner with friends. There's a shop here in Sydney at Marrickville Metro. I can't remember who owns that complex, but it's not one of the big, it's not a Westfield or anything. But they have a really interesting process when you join their webinar. Sorry, not join their webinar, sign up to their Wi-Fi. They definitely ask lifestyle questions. So they ask questions like, when you dine out, are you more inclined to go to, I can't remember, did they say, I think they say McDonald's? No, they don't. They say fast food, a cafe, or fine dining. So they give you those examples. And then they ask things like, if you're going shopping for clothes, are you more inclined to shop online, go to a department store, or a designer label of some sort. And so they're just sort of trying to create categories. And so they're really building this interesting profile in the back end simply based on those lifestyle type questions. Now, of course, they do advertise at me, I assume, and I'm sure I get to see that in some way. Now, all of that might be a little bit fluffy, and I agree, it could be a little bit fluffy, but there are different people on the call today that may resonate and could be of value. But I think the one that is definitely of value for all of us, and this again continues with the folks from Hotjar, is buyer behavior. So now we start to get a little bit closer to more traditional Eloqua type of questions. We think about personas and those sorts of things. Here we look at priority initiatives. We look at perceived barriers, decision criteria, the buyer's journey, and success factors. What does success look like, for example? This is a bit of really different type of way of asking questions. Okay. So one example I thought of, what's the primary pain point for your business today? Is it headcount? Is it the right skills? Is it even defining our problem? Different ways to ask questions. Then, how would you best describe your position right now? Researching viable solutions, discussing selected vendors, or allocating budget. So it really kind of gives you an idea of where they are kind of in that buying journey, I suppose, right? One great example we've got, if you think about universities, and this is kind of interesting one, right? So if a university is trying to gauge where a prospective student is at, how do they go about doing that? Because if you think about think about high school age students, right? So one suggested way to do it would be, for instance, to look at giving people an option to respond to a statement. So it could be, which of the following best describes you? A little bit like what I've done here, right? So maybe if something like, I've got it all sorted, I've got it all planned, I know what I'm doing. Okay, well, that kid clearly has it all sorted. They know exactly what they want. Or maybe it's, I don't know what I want to study. They kind of know they want to go to university, but they just don't know what they want to study. Versus maybe the third student or the high school student who would say, I'm not sure if uni is for me. So right away, based on those three different responses, you can imagine the three different type of nurturing or welcome campaigns you could put that prospective student through. Obviously, the kid that's not even sure that uni is for them, the type of things you want to talk to that student about are going to be very different to the kid that says, I've got it all sorted. That's kind of like the next question for that kid is, okay, well, what is it you want to do? Let's dive straight into it. Okay. Versus for the other kid, it's going to be a very different experience. And so if you apply that same logic, whether you're in financial planning, whether you're providing legal services, accounting services, whatever it may be, try and get a bit of an idea as to where the person is at and kind of why they're spending time with you and your organization. So why do we do all of this? Well, the nice thing is we start to build up information, okay? So you'll now have a range of expressed preferences where people have expressed to you exactly what they want. Now, they could also have explicit subscriptions. They've explicitly subscribed to events. They've explicitly subscribed to maybe legal updates or maybe industry-based information. Don't forget, though, there's also implied data or implicit data. So this could be somebody who has spent all day looking over your website and they disproportionately have spent time, and you can see they've looked at 7 or 8 or 9 pages relating to a particular product or service. Okay, so that's one person, but if you apply some filters in Eloqua and look at a whole bunch of other people, then you start to see that you've got that implicit data that can also be utilized. So how do we actually use all this information now? The first one I want to show you is the email group. So once we get people subscribed to, say, for example, the Eloqua user group, then we record that as a subscription to the email group called Eloqua user group. And so I can go in at any point, I can apply that filter. These are all templated largely, so it's kind of done for me. I don't need to do anything else. But I'll then often add to it as well. But it's my baseline. So those people who have expressly said, yes, I want to subscribe to the Eloqua user group, done. They're in, they're subscribed, it's recorded, it's there until they unsubscribe. Excuse me. Now, the other way that you will do it is you may capture information and store some on the contact. Now, I know I told you earlier, this information is best stored on a CDO. Yes, it is. And we actually also have it on a CDO, but I also have it here on a contact, largely just to show people. That's really all it is. But it's right there. So because it's on the contact, you can share it, obviously, and integrate it with the CRM. It can or cannot be helpful, maybe, for the rest of the team to be aware of these interests that people have expressed. It could or could not. It's up to you. But because it's there, and even when it's on a CDO, same thing, we can then start to use that to drive dynamic content. We can use it as filters on the campaign canvas to adjust the flow of people. We can include and exclude people as we're building segments based on their interests. A really simple example, hopefully most of you, when you get your confirmation email for the user group, you'll have an add to calendar button. And in hopefully many cases for you, it's in fact a single button. And that comes down to, at some point in our relationship, either you or a colleague from your same organization have told us that you use Outlook or you use Gmail or you use Yahoo. I don't think anyone uses Yahoo anymore, but anyway, you may do. And so what we do is we use dynamic content to deliver a much nicer experience to you, so that when you click on add to my Outlook calendar, excuse me, I'm about to sneeze. The information is there in front of you. It's a single button. It's an Outlook tailored experience. So you have hopefully a nice seamless experience. And so if we don't know, we actually present you with 6 buttons, and we keep track of who's clicking on which one. And then we go in and we update everybody in that organization to be either Outlook or Gmail or Apple Mail or whatever it might be throughout that experience. So there's all sorts of ideas there. Hopefully there's been some ways for you to think about a preference center. We'd love to obviously have a chat with you further if this is kind of on your radar and you want to dive into this a little bit further and think about that concept of subscriptions and welcome campaigns and what that actual experience looks like that you're delivering. We're literally in the process of rebuilding ours, and I was hoping to have it ready for you today, but it's not. You'll hear from us shortly, certainly before Christmas, in relation to maybe visiting our preference center to update your information and details, just so we can show it off, basically, and give you a bit of a feel for what it might look like. So as I said earlier, 25D is up and running for many clients, certainly those on the call today. So I just wanted to quickly cover off for you some of the key differences or enhancements that you can experience. First one, the Redwood experience has now been applied to the HTML source editor. So if you spend most of your time in the drag and drop editors, whether landing pages or emails, then this is the source editor. So this is kind of the HTML coding type of experience. So it's a controlled availability, so you do need to request access to it. We've literally just requested access ourselves, and we'll have it available in the next day or so, I imagine. But it just gives a Redwood experience, but it's also a new editor. It's not just a look and feel change. It's actually a functional change as well to how the source editor is used. The audit log. So for those, depending on which edition of Eloqua you're on, the audit log has been redwoodified. I'm not sure that's really a word, but anyway. It's just a bit nicer to look at. It presents information, I think, a little bit clearer as well, and just gives you an idea of if you're the admin and you're typically trying to go through the audit log, you'll find that a different experience. The content assistant. So this is now the next step, as was promised by Eloqua, in the AI-generated content space. Not everybody in the call today has this active, but some of you certainly do. This now enables you to rewrite, lengthen, shorten, or bulletize content within emails, landing pages, dynamic content, and the shared content editors. Now, if you don't see it today, even though you know your instance has been upgraded, Jodie Mooney, I was reaching out to her product manager for Eloqua, and she said, keep in mind, this is a gradual rollout. So it's happening over the next few weeks. Okay. And this will make sense to you, especially for those on pod 7 in just a moment. The other good news for those who potentially had some concerns about the generative AI piece sitting in Chicago, that's now moving to Frankfurt. So most of the Australian clients are on pod 7. Some are on 1, not really on, some are on 6, but most are on 7, on 1. 1 remains in Toronto, and 7, the Gen AI services specifically, are moving to Frankfurt. Not your instance of Eloqua, just the Gen AI piece and the processing and what happens there. That's happening out of Frankfurt. So it'll go from Sydney to Frankfurt and back into your desktop. For those who are focusing on security, probably more so the admins, if your organization has single sign-on, you are now able to actually force all of your users to only use single sign-on in order to log into Eloqua, if that's something that's desired, you'd like to look at. The reason I've got the next one highlighted, this is the email deliverability piece, which goes live, I think it was the beginning of this month, and we've got like a 6-month grace period for some reason, which is good. We're just diving into that a little bit further to get more clarity around that one. So kind of, yeah, just hold the fort on that one for the moment, and we'll get more information to you. If you're subscribed to our important updates, we'll get information through to you via that subscription. Other enhancements that we're looking at, bot click detection service. So this is looking at essentially being able to distinguish, as it says, genuine user from automated activity. So email scan bots, proxy interception bots, any sort of bot that's interrupting emails, which is good, and doing fake clicks. Campaign permissions. So this one is really helpful and just provides greater clarity. So you can separate the create and the default permissions by campaign type within the user settings. So if you've got people within your organization who you need to kind of control a little bit further in relation to what they can and can't do from a campaign point of view, we now have more granularity. So we can expand on that if you'd like to look at that. If you're into the webhook world, then there's certainly more support that's been added there. Thomas on our team has been working quite closely with this, with a whole range of different things, being able to automate some super cool things. So if that's interesting, and webhook is a word that means something to you, please reach out. We'd love to have a chat, and we can walk you through that one in a little bit more detail. Okay, what's on next month? So next month, Wednesday, 3rd of December, will be our final user group for 2025. And we'll be talking about how to personalize those onboarding and welcome campaigns. So today, very much about the preference center. Next month, we wanted to look at what happens after the preference center. When someone comes in, gives you the details, what are we going to do next? And we'll expand on that for you for onboarding and welcome campaigns. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Thanks for joining us. We appreciate you making some time. Thanks for the thumbs up. Much appreciated. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you, everybody.